Season 1 is in the books. The World Soul Saga is underway and Metzen asked you to come home. So how is it looking? Rating's done, Mythic Plus is done, we've explored the delves.
Nice find!
Ansurek lies dead at our feet. And now we're getting ready for the next content. Well, let's give our full, honest review of how this Season 1 went. Let's start with the launch, already mired in controversy with the paid bonus early access. I want to be clear, when it comes to MMOs, I'm fine with pre-orders giving you early access because those are the guys who want to dive in straight away. They don't want the FOMO. They're going to book time off work. And there's nothing worse in a game that is actively pushing character progress to see everybody else progressing and you can't because you can't shell out the extra dollars in order to join in and have fun. Now, Blizzard's obviously looking, as I asked Ian directly at BlizzCon immediately after this was announced, what the point of this thing was, because we'd never had it before, is that he kind of looked a little down about it. And he was like, they need something. It's a bean counter decision. They need something to incentivize people paying more money. It's kind of how he looked at it. And it's often the case, even with the game director, I feel, I don't know this for sure, this was a dictated rule from the money counters. And personally, I think it was a massive balls up. A huge balls up that starts this World Soul Saga. Everybody come back, everybody have fun, and look at it through the window from the outside unless you can afford to spend more money. And then obviously the FOMO kicks in and people are like, I'm just going to end up buying this. I don't want it. I don't want the other rewards, but I'm going to buy it because my favorite game is happening right now in front of my eyes and I literally can't play. And I'm seeing everybody else play it and it sucks. And my friends are leveling and they're having fun. And then I'm going to jump in. They're already going to be leveled. Blah, 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 blah. Terrible idea. I have no doubt, though, this is like pessimistic me, is that there's probably made so much cash they're going to do it again. I just hope that they take a more responsible approach towards their community and just put it into pre-orders. Because pre-orders, I'm fine with. Other games do that all the time for MMOs, and it does, in some way, divide up the player base so the servers are left destroyed. My personal feeling is people would prefer to have a few hours of a laggy mess, but still all get to play together, although it might be frustrating, but continue the next day totally fine, as is historically true with most World of Warcraft launches. It also didn't help, of course, is that immediately once the game was widespread available, is that they then nerfed the leveling. Even if they did any change from what people had in early access to what happened when it went live, quote unquote, it would have been a disaster. But to see people, especially the top streamers from the top guilds, whether you're following Liquid, Method, or Echo, or whoever you're following, leveling 18 characters really quickly in the early access, and then when it goes to retail, they nerf that process, and you're like, dude, what the hell? So, like, it was premium rich access or whatever, right? It's total garbage. Hated every second of it. I don't think it should be done in the future.
We interrupt this regularly scheduled broadcast to talk about Displate. You get me today because Mike forgot to record this before he left for Florida. Displate has thousands of amazing designs from your favourite TV shows, movies and games. They're super easy to put up and take down, you can swap them around. Whether it's from games like WoW, Final Fantasy XIV, or Warhammer 40k, you can find anything you want on the website and I would suggest you give it a look. Check out the link down below or use code PREACH at checkout for up to 27% off anything on the website.
Okay, but the launch overall for both sides went smoothly. Coming down to a gameplay point of view, it was crispy smooth, really nice. Now, what about the leveling process? Far too easy. Blizzard ended up nerfing this shortly after and trying to make the scaling a little better. All right, we talked about this earlier, but the leveling process in MMOs is supposed to be brain dead easy. I get it. I do. I understand it. It's supposed to be for literally everybody, including somebody who's picked up the game, somebody who's using like a third of their abilities total and certainly not doing any sort of optimal rotation. Any seasoned player in an MMO is not going to be looking for a difficult leveling experience in the MMO space. Your difficulty is supposed to come later. It's normal. But generally speaking, the open world was really good. Particular shoutouts to Hallowfall, which was by far my favorite zone. And considering my review in the alpha, I actually much prefer azj'kahet this time. I thought this was a much better play, and the Ringing Deeps was substantially better than the first time I played it on the alpha once it had been played out. I will say the story is a massive step up. Let's talk about the story for a second. It is a huge step up. It's certainly not the pinnacle of MMO storytelling. That title is still firmly held by Final Fantasy XIV. in the Hydaelyn Zodiac era. It is phenomenal. It's not there, but it's better. They did some really good ideas to try and engage people in the story who are traditionally not going to engage with the story. I particularly want to give a shout out here to adding lots more voiceovers after you accept the quest. So if you're a skipper and you're just accept, a lot of the NPCs will actually follow along telling you what the hell is going on. Like at that point, only people playing with literally zero audio and not looking at anything on the screen because the chat bubble's popping up are not going to have some general understanding of what is happening. I really enjoyed so much of the story. I know people didn't like it, but I liked Anduin's story. They took the horrendous mess that is Shadowlands and tried to take it seriously. And they also reset a lot of the characters who have been turned into memes. You know, Bran Bronzebeard would be a great example of that. We had a ridiculous moment in an Ulduar Time Walking recently, is every time someone turns a quest in, the voice line resets and plays over again, turning Bran into a meme, and he had become a meme over the years.
This is what we call
Entry denied. Access level insufficient.
This is what we call your access, you wretched machine. Here it is again. Norganon's key. This is
Access to the archive granted. Intrusion mechanisms suspended.
Trying to reset that character and physically change that character. I'm still not going to go into spoilers here, but if you've played it, you've played it. To physically change that character, to give him a fresh start. The same with Khadgar. These forgotten characters that just walk in, disappear, and wander out. Now they're here, and now they're going to do something with them and have their presence be felt because they should be. One of the big issues that World of Warcraft has had over the years is very powerful, very major characters in their storylines just not being present when they should be, because they would absolutely be helpful here and they should be helping with the situation. Azeroth faces, existential crisis or whatever, and suddenly Khadgar's just not here for some reason, or Jaina's not here, and Thrall's just not here. It's like they would absolutely be here. They seem to be resolving that. On the story note, though, yes, I very much enjoyed the main campaign. However, I really feel it's time to drop the time gating of the story. I don't think it serves a purpose anymore, and in fact causes more angst and frustration than is necessary. I really do think that once Metzen fully takes control, as Metzen had an interview just before the World Saga came out, saying that his influence is not really going to be felt until later on, because a lot of what the War Within was actually done when he came back. So he has rejiggled some of the start, but his real influence is going to be felt towards the end of the World Soul Saga and in the middle and early stages. So we'll probably see that sort of mid to late. The War Within is where Metzen really jumps in and see what he's doing with it and where this story's going. But you could tell from the alpha to the release of the War Within is that they did go back and, with a fine-tooth comb, remove things that would have been a little weird. So a good example of this would have been the initial hatred in Hallowfall towards anybody who has touched the Void. That it was mainly targeted at Illyria. It's like, we don't trust anybody who's with the Void because our crystal turns dark and that's really bad. So we don't like anybody with the Void. However, they went back and realized, hey, there are Voidborn characters here. Right? We've got Shadow Priests. This is going to be really weird if they're all like pointing fingers at Illyria and you're stood there with your purple glow going, I mean, this is a little odd. So they went back and tied up a lot of loose ends, which is, I never found a logical fallacy in the story so far and felt that they did really well. A lot of good connecting moments. Playing chess with Anduin was really good. All that stuff played well, but the time gating of the story literally turned off members of my team from playing any more of the War Within because they just came back. The story happens in this like reasonable hour and a half period, and then it cuts off at some cliffhanger for another week for some reason, despite the fact that it shouldn't, because we've already paid the month. You're not getting more time out of us for doing this. You're just time gating it because it's been done. And that's where I would point out here how Ian very regularly has pointed out is like, we need to start letting go of the antiquated ideas of what MMOs were in the early 2000s and the rules that were set by our forefathers. It's something Ian talks about a lot, is when he joined the team actively as his role in Mists of Pandaria, is he came into a lot of pre-established rules. This is how we do things. This is how it is done. And now we're in the 2020s. Like, these rules just no longer apply. The gaming sphere as a whole is so different. You've got games like I'm wearing here, like Path of Exile, etc., that are just sat there for free, that are offering hundreds of hours of content, and you need to be able to catch up with that. Final Fantasy XIV, once again, is offering like most of its game entirely for free until you get to the late stage. It's several hundred hours. We need to drop away these antiquated hard and fast rules when World of Warcraft was the king supreme on its throne and start doing away with it. And one of them I think they should absolutely get away with is the time gating story. It needs to be done in a better way. It leads to people forgetting the details that have just happened, and then they go and do a load of Mythic Plus or open world content, and then they come back and it's like, oh, now we're catching up with the story. There are certain things that I'm fine with time gating, such as finding the relic memories to go down and figure out, oh, this is the history of what's going on here. Those are cool, something to look forward to. But in terms of the main story and the Horde and the Alliance arriving, that should be part of the continuing story of when you play. I'm not expecting a 40-hour story campaign from World of Warcraft, but if you want us to be caring and interested in the story, stop time gating it. It's very, very frustrating. So those are the basic things. Let's talk about the endgame in Renown. I really liked that the focus wasn't on capping your character. In fact, or completing all the zones. It was just doing the story, and then the endgame opened up regardless of what level you were, and you could get going. Very little was actually tied behind being level capped. That was a great idea because it allowed people to start working on other things. I liked that they had the access to the epic rewards, the early gearing process from Renown, basically just by playing the game normally while leveling. I had access to all of that stuff just naturally by playing the game. And then if you want the fancy rewards, you want the extra things, that's the stuff you're going to be doing later on. And that's stuff that's not super relevant to your character in terms of power progress or anything along those lines. That was super nice. I really enjoyed it. I do like the azj'kahet stuff. But one thing, and I do not like the event in the top zone with the party, with the theater performance. Once again, and this is going to be a continuing thing throughout this, World of Warcraft suffers so heavily, and we're going to come back to this in raiding, with many players on the screen, and it definitely needs to be fixed. Whether this is the World Soul Saga is leading to a revamp of the engine at the end, or WoW 2, something along those lines needs to happen, because as days and years pass, it's just getting worse. You get more than 20 people in a room, it's a nightmare. The whole thing falls apart and the game is practically unplayable, and that's not something you want. The product is not fit for purpose for what they're trying to deliver. One thing I do point out here, and I think is something that doesn't fit into a particular section, is that World of Warcraft still does not offer a reasonable player challenge outside of the Raid and Mythic Plus sphere and PvP. And I think that's a real shame. While I understand the leveling process is, of course, accessible for everyone, there should be more things that are a really good challenge, which probably leaves us to delves, right? Delves are fine. They need iteration. Right now, they're kind of purposeless once you pass a certain gear level, which is very easily obtainable. There's not much point in going past 8 at all. I think that's okay, though. For a first go at what delves are and finding out how players treat them, how players are interacting with them, there are lots of players doing delves every day and using it as their primary gearing source, unlocking their vaults, whatever it might be. Now Blizzard needs to figure out a way of making these a more interesting temptation to actually push and do something with them, because then we will have access to that challenge I was talking about earlier. Level 8s are relatively simplistic. Going past that can get harder, but there's also not much point in doing it, and you're kind of just hoping for maps if you're looking for actually acquiring gear, which are a pretty low drop rate. And as we've seen, certainly over the last couple of weeks, they are nerfing the ways people are finding, very similar to Maw of Souls in Legion, of being efficient with them. So we saw with Zekvir, the easier version of Zekvir is people could spam that, it's not hard to do, and they could do it very, very quickly because there's no trash, there's no story, it's just straight into a room with a boss. People are spamming that to fill their vaults, or to get Valor Stones, or whatever it might be, and then they nerfed it again because people are still utilizing it for the things they don't want them to do. People will point to Zekvir question mark as that difficulty. Like, it's over there, Mike, it's over there. I've done it. It's okay, it's a fine boss, but it's a one and done thing. I see no real reason to go back and actively farm it or to do anything with it. It's just a one and done. I'm talking about some regular challenge. The Ringing Deep's weekly event, although it did have to be nerfed, which is odd to me because it's very simple, but it's also very similar to the Proving Grounds, which we know a lot of people couldn't do. I get it. It's supposed to be a nice weekly thing to jump into. I just don't want all my open world content to be brain dead easy, but making it hard is pointless. That's what I'm looking for, okay? That's what I'm asking for. It's like, I want some challenge out here that's reasonably rewarding that isn't involving something super difficult. in terms of the mass player base that I can work on myself, right? I would prefer the Ringing Deeps to have a more difficult step up that maybe is shorter, but it's harder to do, and then you're tempting people to do it in a more efficient way. Perhaps it has a higher chance of dropping the mount. Things along those lines that are just going to tempt people to try and get a bit better at the ideas of the game's mechanics, soaking things, interrupting things, which is what that idea is. It's an advancement on the proving grounds. I would really like to see that. I want to move on to the thing that I hate the most in the War Within, and I really think needs changing, and changing pretty damn quick. And it's going to be an interesting point to see in the comments here, because this falls into the weird category that I have dealt with for well over a decade of producing content in MMOs, is that if you get it, you think it's fine. And that means a lot of people really defend these systems because they understand it and therefore it's not that bad, right? And I have this across every MMO that I cover, is from an outside perspective when I come in, and this is the feedback I give to the developers of those games. It's like, this system is really bad. Your current players are probably fine with it because they're used to it and therefore it makes sense to them. But for anybody looking from the outside or coming in on their day one, this thing is awful. And in this case, it is the gearing system. The gearing system is horrendous in the War Within. Absolutely horrendous. And I want you to look at this through the eyes of the people who sat there watching BlizzCon, and to have Chris Metzen come out and say it's time to come home. They may have not played the game since Shadowlands or BFA or perhaps earlier, and walk into this nightmare that is the gearing system. What makes this extra ironic for me, and we covered this in the past, is that secret meetings with developers where they gave conferences and things, and images that were leaked showed how much they hated the Wrath of the Lich King badge system because it was producing too many badges. That was like 4 badges by the end of the expansion, and they considered that way too much. And now we're here with many levels and tiers of crests, multiple pathways of gear to upgrade that require combinations of Valor Stones for some reasons, and I don't think I need to go into too much detail about how frustrating the Valor Stone situation is. I get what it's supposed to do. It's trying to make sure that their world is active and alive because you have to go and do this damn basic content to get this stupid currency. But it's a limiting factor in upgrading your gear well beyond it being necessary because it's open world and silly content that rewards it. You're so far past that. And yet still it persists in being like, you still need it. And Blizzard needs to be a little careful with this because they're falling back into the Shadowlands trap via a different door. Let's not forget that by the time we got to Shadowlands, along with its myriad problems, is one of the issues people had is like, I just had relentless amounts of chores to do all the goddamn time. And it was the only thing to do. And I just kept having to go round and round and round these goddamn circles. I had to go and save the souls. I had to go and do this every day in order to keep my character up to date. They're doing it again via the Valor Stone system. They're like, well, yeah, well, you don't have to do any of the renown, right? You don't have to do any of that. But you kind of still need this thing. And they're falling into the Azurite trap again. And they need to be very careful not to, like, overdo it because it's going to happen again where people are like, dude, it's just relentless. Like, I still need to do this. Let's rewind, though. Let's go back to the crest system. What was wrong with Valor Points? Obtainable from many, many sources. What was wrong with that? In order to have a simple one-and-done currency that you can upgrade your items with, and that was great. People were fine with that. Now we have multiple crests that come from all different sources, and is now hard-locking people at certain gear levels because the accessibility to the next levels requires an enormous step up in ability of the player in order to achieve it. So, and you can achieve the lower tier extraordinarily easy. And now you're managing all these crests. You now have multiple channels to swap them, move them around. Once you've got this achievement, you can then trade certain amounts for certain amounts and then unpack them and move them. What are you doing? And this doesn't even touch onto the crafting system, which I know I'm not the only one who is full done with this system, despite the fact that I have a guild that will make anything I put in there very easily. I just can't be bothered with it. It's just frustrating. It's annoying. There's so many pitfalls and noob traps. So many documents are having to be produced for the player base and videos. So shout out Dratnos here, did a massive guide on like, okay, you upgrade this one. There's flowcharts. If you is it this level? Which track is it on? Okay, you want to spend it here. And people love being efficient in their MMOs. They do not like wasting currency. And there are so many pitfalls that you can fall into here. The crafting system, you got to send this off. You got to get an enchanted one. Then you got to get that sent back. Then you can go and get this crafted over here. It's too much. It's insane. It's not necessary, and it's making the whole thing a mess. a simple system of rewarding people who have bad luck, they do several raids, and they don't get anything, and then having some way of getting system like we had in the Sunwell is like, oh, you did all this? Okay, there's really good loot that's from here. Maybe you can get better in the raid, you know, you can get your spy masters from there, but we're not going to leave you high and dry because you've clearly been playing the game. You've clearly been doing stuff, so here's a simple reward to do that, and maybe something that could allow people to like, I've got this really good piece, it's normal, it's heroic, whatever. I'm not going to do Mythic, but I can upgrade it to be pretty damn close via a Valor Point system. Nice and simple. Doesn't need like 6 or 7 crest tiers and all this kind of garbage that's going on. Absolutely hate it. I think it's the biggest letdown for me. And I'm looking it through the eyes of somebody returning to this game from a time when bosses dropped items. Is it good for me? Is it not? Oh, it is. I equip it.
Is it any good?
That's a great question, Chris. That is a wonderful question. Is this trinket any good? The most often asked question in World of Warcraft. Is this trinket any fucking good? Right? That's it. That was the end of it. Like, did it drop or did it not? It didn't. Okay, we run again. Right? I need that trinket from that dungeon. All right, we go. We just do it over and over again. I got it. Okay, but once I got it, thumbs up. I'm done. Right? I'm not looking to just do endless content to get crests to upgrade something else, and I'm not even interested in getting loot from this dungeon anymore. Blah, 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 blah. The whole circle. It's one of those systems that, again, if you're used to it, you're into it, it's fine. You get it. But just trust me, for a lot of players coming back are just looking at it going, okay, so I really do genuinely need to read quite a lot of documentation before I can engage with this system properly or in an efficient way, and that's just not that fun. It's really not. Maybe I'm boomer on this. I prefer to go, where does this come from? We go there. I want to do this Mythic Plus. That's where my thing comes from, and I'm done. That's about it. Let's talk about raiding. The raid was actually okay. Okay, yes, I was at the Race to World First, and my thoughts and, on the feelings on the Race to World First are very different than what's happening in the general player base. Putting the Race to World First to a side, I've talked about that. Let's talk about like normal and heroic. Normal was fine. I thought normal was okay. Heroic, though, up until a day ago when they finally implemented nerfs, was an absolute cluster of design. Very weird. All the way up until Ansurek. So the experience we had, again, this is anecdotal, but I know many other people had the same thing, is that you one-shot. By week 2 or week 3, you were one-shotting every single boss in that raid on heroic with a reasonably prepared team, including the Silken Core up to Ansurek, and then being hard stuck on Ansurek Phase 1 for hours. This jump in the difficulty curve of neru'bar Palace overall, from Mythic, Heroic, etc., is just all over the place. It's so weird how much it skyrockets at certain points for no real reason. And in a genuine way, multiple Mythic bosses are significantly easier with a reasonably competent group than a Heroic Ansurek is. We have seen this in the past, right? Blackhand was the same, Archimon was the same, but we should be past this sort of bizarre difficulty spike. Some of the decisions they made with Heroic Ansurek's design are so punishing to be just completely unnecessary, like cruel. And cruel was a word I used a lot during the Race to World First. There's a lot of design choices are not just like unforgiving, they're cruel. They're like double down on how mean it is. So someone dying for P1, for example, is going to lead, and it won't anymore, to just you getting in the whole raid just exploding for massive damage. Absolutely stupid. What also is a big problem here, or what I return to, is the game's inability to handle too many players on the screen. I don't see any bigger argument when we have this choice that WoW 2 needs to come. Even if it looks visually identical, but it's built on a much more modern engine than this. 30 people, Heroic Ansurek, is a nightmare for anybody who's not playing the latest hardware, right? Yes, sure, the top guilds in the world are carrying people through that for their split runs, but every single one of them is usually running on a ridiculously high-end PC, and also being very choosy about who gets to go, who's likely very high geared, and there's a reasonable chance they have a decent bit of hardware behind them. Anybody playing a middle of the road PC, Heroic Ansurek 30-man is practically unplayable. We had many people crashing, running on the spot, couldn't do anything once it got to 30 people. To give you an example, we spent probably 4.5 hours of progress on Heroic Ansurek 30-man, which was rarely getting to phase 3. When we dropped into 20-man, we killed it in 5 pulls. And the game genuinely felt weird. Weird. on the pull that it actually played with reasonable amount of frames. Like, even 30 frames was crazy. On my PC, which is very powerful. Blizzard needs to address this. Like, the rating difficulty curve was scuffed all over the place. They're making nerfs now in order to correct it, but this is the biggest example I can see from this raid tier, is that the game is just not capable anymore. And I genuinely kind of believe it might be time, if they can't fix this for the next 6 years or do something about it, it might be worth actively limiting how many people can go to Heroic, because it's just not fun for so many people. And you can see this reflected in the Pug world, who do not do 30-man. And the reason is, in my opinion, is it's like, there's just too much room for error that can snowball, even though that's being fixed via nerfs. But also, the game just doesn't play very well. It's not fun. It's not interesting. You're playing just a laggy, stupid mess all the time, and it's not fun at all. They need to fix it. And we just fucking
Good job. There we go.
Oh,
Boom.
God.
That felt great. Played up my mind there. Holy shit.
Let's see Mike get all the loot.
I do want to mention Mythic Plus briefly in my thoughts here, although I will say this. Mythic Plus has been the least interesting thing I've engaged with in the launch of The War Within, for several reasons. I'm kind of over it, personally, running dungeons over and over again. I'm glad people really love Mythic Plus, but it's just such another endless road to go on. And considering that doesn't really interest me at this point, is farming crests, getting score, those kind of things don't really appeal to me as a gamer anymore. That it's a system I've barely engaged with. I've done a few like 5s and 6 and then just left it there. I had no interest whatsoever to do any more of it, and so I haven't. What I can say is, obviously, from the forums and from the feedback, is it's not in a good place. They're trying to correct it. They're trying to make some nerfs. I think a lot of this is still the adjustment of the numbering system. People are still very much used to, oh, I need to do a 15 and things like that, despite the fact that's like a 25, 26 or something stupid at this point, and not really getting that message, and therefore they feel bad. It's kind of like when the numbers squish came in, is that they're struggling in a 5 and 6, where previously that was like the free one. This might be something that corrects itself over time, but part of the problem, again, is the crest system is requiring you to do certain higher level tiers, which are now really, really hard, far harder than they were previously to get those. And people are really struggling, because the Mythic Pluses are obviously not balanced. The dungeons are never balanced in terms of which one's easier, which one's harder. The affix change is a good change, but it still leads to many issues within the sphere of complexity that some people just can't meet, but they still want to advance their character, and now they're ending up stuck in that endless loop of, I can't get into a dungeon. When I do get into a dungeon, it wipes and falls apart because the dungeon key is too hard. Round and round. A negative experience, not fun, something Delves was supposed to solve for some people and just haven't met the mark yet. So that'll be interesting. As we move along the World Soul Saga, the future for me needs to address a few things that are still the antiquated things of the past. I think that's still their biggest issue. I think the gearing system definitely needs reevaluating, relooking at, and just simplifying, cutting down, shredding down. I think a lot of people would appreciate that, in my opinion. I think we would definitely like to see Delves be pushed a little more to make them more tempting to combat the idea of Mythic Plus. It doesn't need to be as rewarding. Give as many crests if they're still going to be around, but there should be good, ample reason beyond achievements to push higher into the Delve system and have that as a personal challenge that people can go on if they want to. I would love to see proper Delve guides of how you do this, how you get around it, how you deal with this, that people can work on individually to give that Mage Tower-esque experience. I don't think Zekvir question mark is it, but there's an opportunity there. Glad it's evergreen, want to see it iterated on. And my final point really is this is a much more story-driven expansion than before, is to have that storytelling no longer be time-gated and messed around with. There you have it. Is it perfect? No. There's lots of ways they can modify it and change it, in my opinion, but I imagine some of you disagree with some of the things I've said, and I would love to hear that different point of view if you would be so kind as to leave it down below. So, as Season 2 approaches, I would love to see the changes I've thought about, but maybe that's not the direction for everybody else. Some simple tweaks, the time gating, the gearing system could be simplified. All these things I think would make a broader, more accessible game that we can all enjoy. But let me know what you think. And remember, pick yourself up a display if you want to make your room look cool, all right? I'll see you again. Bye, guys.